When Sterling Vale came home rich after 7 years in Singapore, he expected to find his mother living comfortably in the lakeside house he had spent years paying for. Instead, he found her at sunrise in a cemetery outside Meridian, Mississippi, kneeling beside his father's grave with a bucket of murky water and a worn brush in her hands. She wasn't there to mourn, she was there to work, and when he called her name, the fear in her eyes was worse than the sight itself. Then she whispered 5 words that made no sense at all. "Don't let Lydia know. Welcome to today's story." If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 7 years earlier, Sterling had left believing money could protect the people he loved. The flight from Singapore landed in Jackson just after midnight. By dawn, Sterling was already driving east toward Meridian in a rented black SUV, the same kind of vehicle he never bothered to drive overseas, because someone else usually handled transportation for him. At 42, he had become the kind of man people called successful before they knew anything else about him. He owned part of a logistics company that moved products across 3 continents. His suits were tailored, his calendar was packed months in advance, his phone never stopped vibrating. Yet during the entire drive, none of that mattered. He was thinking about home. More specifically, he was thinking about Ruth. His mother had refused every invitation to move overseas. She had refused luxury apartments, private healthcare plans, and even the offer to live closer to him. She always said the same thing, "My life is here." So Sterling had done what he thought was the next best thing. After his father Malcolm died, he bought Ruth a small lakeside property outside Meridian, nothing extravagant, just a peaceful house with a porch facing the water and enough space for her garden. He sent money regularly, he paid the taxes, he covered repairs. As far as he knew, she was comfortable, happy even. The plan was simple: visit the cemetery first, say hello to his father, then surprise his mother. The morning air was cool when he pulled through the iron gates of Oak Ridge Memorial Cemetery. Rows of headstones stretched across rolling green hills. The sun had only begun to rise, painting everything gold. Sterling stopped by a florist stand near the entrance and bought fresh white lilies, his father's favorite. Malcolm Vale had been gone for nearly 6 years, but Sterling still found himself wanting to tell him things about the company, about Singapore, about mistakes he wished he could undo. The cemetery was quiet except for the distant sound of water splashing. Sterling frowned. Workers usually arrived later. He followed the sound around a line of oak trees. Then he stopped. The lilies nearly slipped from his hand. A woman was kneeling beside a headstone. Her back was turned toward him. She wore faded work pants and an old cemetery service jacket several sizes too large. A bucket sat beside her. A wire brush scraped slowly across weathered stone. At first he didn't recognize her. Then she shifted slightly. Sterling felt his chest tighten. "Mom?" The brush stopped moving. The woman froze. For several seconds she didn't turn around. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, she looked over her shoulder. Ruth Vale, his mother. Her hair was thinner than he remembered. Her face looked older, not older from time, older from hardship. There was dirt on her gloves, water stains on her sleeves, exhaustion in her eyes. For a moment neither of them spoke. Sterling stared at her. His mind refused to accept what he was seeing. This wasn't possible, not Ruth, not here, not working in a cemetery, not beside Malcolm's grave. "Mom," he said again, "what are you doing?" Ruth stood too quickly. The bucket tipped sideways, water spilled into the grass. Her expression wasn't relief, it wasn't happiness, it was panic, real panic. She hurried toward him and grabbed his arm. "Sterling," her voice trembled. "What happened?" he asked. "Why are you here?" She glanced toward the cemetery office, then toward the parking lot, then toward the road beyond the gates, as if she expected someone to appear. "Lower your voice." The words stunned him. "Mom, you're working here, please." "Why?" Her grip tightened. For the first time, Sterling noticed how thin her hands had become. "I said please." He looked down at the work jacket. A stitched name tag hung crookedly above the pocket. "Ruth, Eam." His stomach turned. Did something happen to the house? Ruth immediately looked away. That reaction told him more than any answer could have. Sterling's pulse quickened. "Mom," she shook her head. No what? No questions here." The fear in her voice made no sense. Unless this wasn't about money. Unless this wasn't about bad luck. unless someone had made her afraid. Finally she whispered a name, Lydia. Sterling blinked. His aunt, his father's younger sister. What about Lydia? Ruth swallowed. Her eyes filled with a kind of dread he had never seen before. Then she leaned closer. If someone had walked past them, they would have thought she was sharing a secret. In a way, she was. If Lydia finds out you're back, she whispered, she'll move everything before you can see the truth. And for the first time since stepping into the cemetery, Sterling realized this story was going to be far worse than he had imagined. Sterling did not move for a few seconds. The cemetery was still waking around them. A maintenance cart hummed somewhere near the office. Birds moved through the oak trees. The sun climbed higher over the rows of polished stone, touching the wet grass where Ruth had spilled the bucket. But Sterling heard only one thing. If Lydia finds out you're back, she'll move everything before you can see the truth. He looked at his mother's face and understood that whatever had happened to her had not happened in one day. Fear like that did not arrive suddenly. It settled into a person. It taught them where to stand, when to lower their voice, which doors not to open. Come with me, he said. Ruth immediately shook her head. No, Mom, no, Sterling. Not yet. He looked toward the cemetery office. A woman in a grey cardigan had stepped outside with a clipboard. She was too far away to hear them, but Ruth still turned her body slightly, as if she could make herself smaller. Sterling's jaw tightened. He wanted to walk into that office, ask who had hired his mother, who had approved that jacket, who had let a woman in her late 60s kneel beside her husband's grave with a scrub brush at dawn. But he knew the answer would not be in that office. The office was only where the humiliation had become visible. The cause was somewhere else. Get in the car, he said quietly. You don't have to explain here. Ruth looked at the headstone behind her. Malcolm Vale, beloved husband, beloved father. Sterling felt the words strike him in the chest. He had paid for that stone from overseas. He had approved the inscription through email while sitting in a glass conference room in Singapore. His grief folded between shipping contracts and investor calls. He had thought that was responsibility. Now his mother was cleaning dirt from the base of that same stone for pay. Ruth reached down for the bucket, but Sterling took it from her hand. Leave it, they'll dock my pay. That sentence did something to him. It did not make him louder, it made him colder. They won't dock anything, he said. Ruth's eyes filled, but she did not cry. She only removed the gloves slowly, folded them together, and placed them on top of the bucket as if even in humiliation she still believed in leaving things neat. Sterling walked her to the SUV. She sat in the passenger seat but kept both hands tight in her lap. The work jacket swallowed her shoulders. The stitched name tag looked cruel now, like someone had reduced his mother to a function. He pulled out of the cemetery without speaking. Only when the iron gates disappeared behind them did he ask, "Where have you been living?" Ruth turned toward the window. "I'm all right, that isn't what I asked. I have a place." "A place where?" She did not answer. The road bent past pine trees and low fields. Meridian spread slowly ahead, quiet in the morning light. Sterling knew this part of Mississippi. He knew the churches with hand-painted signs, the gas stations where men drank coffee before work, the long stretches of land that looked empty until you noticed every fence, every mailbox, every family history sitting behind the trees. He had spent years trying to outrun this place. Then he had spent years paying for it from far away. "What did Lydia do?" he asked. Ruth closed her eyes. "Sterling, please don't start with her until you understand. Then help me understand. She has papers." "What papers?" Ruth's mouth tightened. "Papers I signed." Sterling glanced at her. "For what?" She said it was temporary. The word sat between them. Temporary. People used that word when they wanted someone vulnerable to survive the first step of a trap. Sterling slowed at a red light. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "The house?" Ruth did not say yes, she did not have to. He turned toward the lakeside road. Ruth noticed immediately. "No, we're going there." "No, Sterling, I bought that house for you. You don't understand. Then I'll understand when I see it." Her breath changed, not quite a gasp, more like someone bracing for impact. Sterling hated that sound because he remembered his mother as steady. Ruth Vale had once been the kind of woman who could look a banker, a doctor, or a grieving neighbor straight in the eye and make the room calm down. Now she sat beside him, afraid of a driveway. The house appeared at the end of a curved road lined with magnolia trees. Sterling slowed before the gate. For a second he thought he had the wrong place. The house was brighter than he remembered. New white paint, black shutters, a wide porch with expensive rocking chairs. Fresh landscaping bordered the walkway. Near the entrance, a polished wooden sign hung from 2 iron posts. Vale Heritage Retreat. Beneath it, in smaller letters, was a phrase that made Sterling's stomach tighten: supporting widows, dignity, and rural housing. There were cars in the circular driveway, nice cars, a silver Lexus, 2 black SUVs, a catering van parked near the side entrance. Ruth shrank into the seat. "Don't stop here," she whispered. Sterling parked anyway. Through the front windows he could see movement inside. Women in linen dresses, men in jackets without ties. The table laid with coffee urns and trays of fruit. Someone laughed loudly, the kind of laugh people used at events where no one wanted to look too serious too soon. Sterling stepped out. Ruth stayed in the car. He walked around to her side and opened the door. "Come on," she shook her head. "I can't. This is your house." Her eyes lifted to him then, and what he saw there made him lose the next words. It was not simple fear, it was shame. Not because she had done something wrong, but because someone had taught her that being seen in her own pain would make things worse. Before Sterling could speak again, the front door opened. A woman in a pale blue dress stepped onto the porch holding a glass cup of coffee. Her silver hair was shaped perfectly around her face. Her smile appeared before any real feeling reached her eyes. Lydia Vale. For a moment she simply stared, then her smile widened. "Sterling," she called, warm enough for the guests inside to hear. "My goodness. Nobody told me you were coming home." Sterling looked at his aunt, standing on the porch of the house he had bought for his mother. "I wanted it to be a surprise," he said. Lydia's eyes moved past him to the SUV. Ruth was visible through the windshield. Something sharp flickered across Lydia's face. It lasted less than a second, but Sterling saw it. Not surprise, calculation. Then Lydia placed one hand over her chest. "Ruth, sweetheart," she said, her voice carrying across the driveway. "You should have called me if you needed a ride." Ruth did not move. Sterling turned back to Lydia. "Why was my mother cleaning headstones at Oak Ridge this morning?" The porch went quiet. Behind Lydia, the conversations inside softened. Faces turned toward the door. Lydia kept smiling, but her fingers tightened around the coffee cup. "Oh, Sterling," she said gently. "I was hoping we could discuss this privately. Your mother has had a very difficult time since Malcolm passed. She insists on keeping herself busy in ways that aren't always healthy." Sterling took one step closer. She was wearing an employee jacket. "Yes," Lydia said softly, as if explaining something sad to someone unreasonable. "She gets attached to routines. It gives her a sense of purpose." The words were smooth, too smooth. Sterling looked past Lydia into the house. Near the hallway, stacked against one wall, were cardboard boxes labeled with black marker. Donation brochures, event linens, winter outreach, and on top of one box sat a framed photograph of Ruth and Malcolm that Sterling recognized from his mother's old bedroom. His mother's bedroom. Now storage. His throat tightened. "Where does she sleep?" he asked. Lydia's smile finally thinned. "This is not the time." "It's exactly the time." A man in a navy blazer appeared behind Lydia. Sterling did not know him. He held a folder and wore the careful expression of someone paid to look calm around money. Lydia glanced back at him, then at Sterling. "Your mother made choices," she said. "Legal choices. Documented choices. If you came home looking for someone to blame, you should be careful before you embarrass her in front of people who care about this family." Sterling looked at Ruth through the windshield. She had not stepped out. She was watching him with both hands pressed together, silently begging him not to push too far. But Lydia had already said too much. "Show me the documents," Sterling said. Lydia's face settled into something colder than a smile. "Of course," she said, "but you should prepare yourself. The house is no longer arranged the way you think it is." Sterling felt the ground shift beneath everything he believed. "What does that mean?" Lydia held his gaze. "It means your mother signed the transfer herself," she said. "And there were witnesses." The smile never completely left Lydia's face. That was what bothered Sterling most. Not the accusation. Not the claim that Ruth had signed away control of her own home. It was the calm certainty behind Lydia's expression. She looked like someone who had rehearsed this moment years ago. Around them the branch guests pretended not to listen. No one moved, no one interrupted. The house suddenly felt less like a home and more like a stage. "Show me the documents," Sterling repeated. Lydia glanced toward the man in the navy blazer standing beside her. He stepped forward immediately. "Perhaps another day would be better," he said. Emotions are understandably high. Sterling looked directly at him. "And you are Greg Hollister, Family Trust Administrator." The answer landed hard. Sterling had never heard the name before. Not once, not in emails, not in financial reports, not in any discussion involving the property he had purchased. Yet somehow there was now a trust administrator standing inside his mother's house. "Interesting," Sterling said. Greg shifted uncomfortably. Lydia quickly stepped in. "Sterling, you've been gone a long time. I've been working, of course, to support my family." A brief silence followed. Lydia nodded sympathetically, the way people nodded when they wanted to appear compassionate without actually agreeing. "And we've all appreciated that." The word "we" irritated him immediately. "We." As if she had been carrying the burden alongside him, as if Ruth had not spent the morning scrubbing headstones. Sterling took out his phone. Lydia's eyes narrowed slightly. "What are you doing?" "Taking pictures." He turned and photographed the sign outside, Vale Heritage Retreat. Then he photographed the front porch, the donation tables, the branded banners, the boxes stacked inside the hallway. Lydia's smile faded another degree. "That's unnecessary, maybe. You're creating a scene." "No," Sterling replied calmly. "I think I'm documenting one." The silence around them deepened. Several guests suddenly found their coffee cups very interesting. One older woman quietly walked away toward the garden. Sterling noticed something else. Not a single photograph of Ruth appeared anywhere in the entry hall. Plenty of Malcolm, several of Lydia, even framed images from charity events. But nothing that suggested the woman who supposedly signed everything away still belonged here. That absence felt intentional, deliberate, like someone had edited her out of her own life. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. "I'm leaving," he said. Relief flashed across Lydia's face. Then he added, "For now." The relief disappeared. Back at the SUV, Ruth looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally. Like every minute spent near that house reopened an old wound. Sterling got behind the wheel and started the engine. Neither spoke for nearly 5 minutes. The lake shimmered beside the road. A fisherman sat alone at the end of a dock. The normality of the scene felt almost offensive. Finally, Sterling broke the silence. "When did you move out?" Ruth stared through the windshield. "A year and a half ago." His grip tightened. 18 months. 18 months. He had been sending money every month during that time, paying taxes, paying insurance, covering maintenance, all while his mother was cleaning graves. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ruth looked down at her hands. "I tried." The answer surprised him. "What does that mean?" She hesitated, then slowly opened her purse. The leather was worn, the edges cracked. She removed a small bundle of envelopes held together by a rubber band. Sterling recognized his own Singapore address immediately. His stomach dropped. Every envelope had been returned, unopened. He took one carefully. The postmark was from almost 14 months earlier, another from 11 months, another from 8, all addressed to him, all returned. He looked at Ruth. "I never got these, I know. Who returned them?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she looked out the window again. "At first I thought they were getting lost." Sterling felt anger building beneath his ribs. Cold anger. Controlled anger. The dangerous kind. Then I stopped believing they were getting lost. For a moment, neither said anything. The implications hung between them. Someone had been intercepting communication. Someone had made sure Ruth remained isolated. Someone had benefited from that isolation. Sterling already knew the name forming in his mind, Lydia. But suspicion wasn't proof. He needed proof. Real proof. The SUV rolled through downtown Meridian. Small businesses lined the streets, an antique store, a pharmacy, a diner, ordinary places, ordinary lives. Yet somehow his own family had become something he barely recognized. His phone buzzed, a message from his assistant in Singapore. He ignored it. Then another notification appeared. This one caught his attention. It was from the local bank that managed part of his Mississippi holdings. He had requested account summaries before flying home. The files had finally arrived. Sterling opened them while stopped at a traffic light. Several transactions immediately stood out. Large maintenance withdrawals, property improvement expenses, administrative fees, consulting costs, Thousands of dollars, repeated over and over. The listed recipient on many of them was a company he had never heard of, Southern Legacy Management. The address was local, Meridian. Sterling took a screenshot, then another. The light turned green. He drove on. "Mom," he said quietly, "do you know a company called Southern Legacy Management?" Ruth's face changed, only slightly. "But enough. I've heard the name. Where?" She hesitated. "Some of the papers Lydia brought." Sterling nodded. There it was again. The papers. Always the papers. Always documents appearing when Ruth was vulnerable. Documents she signed. Documents nobody else seemed to see. The road narrowed as they left town. Eventually Ruth pointed ahead. "Turn there." Sterling looked up. A small county road disappeared between pine trees. "Where are we going?" "My place." The words hurt far more than they should have. My place. Not home, not the lake house, not the house Malcolm had lived in. Just my place. The road became gravel. Branches hung low overhead. The farther they drove, the more isolated everything became. Finally, an old church appeared. Weathered white paint bordered side windows. A leaning bell tower. No congregation. No cars. No activity. Just silence. Sterling slowed. "This is where you've been living?" Ruth didn't answer. She simply pointed to the back of the property. Sterling followed the direction of her finger. At first he saw nothing, then he noticed it, partially hidden behind trees, a rusted steel rectangle, long, low, industrial, a shipping container. His heart sank. The SUV rolled forward slowly. Closer, closer. The container came fully into view. One side had been patched with mismatched panels. A small improvised awning leaned against the structure. Two battered solar panels sat at an angle near the roofline. Rain barrels stood beside concrete blocks. Someone had tried very hard to make it livable. Someone who had almost nothing. Sterling stopped the vehicle, neither moved. For several seconds he simply stared through the windshield. This wasn't temporary, this wasn't emergency shelter. This was survival, the kind built one compromise at a time. Then he noticed something else. A man was standing near the container door watching them, tall, gray-haired, weathered face, maybe 70. He looked neither surprised nor alarmed, just cautious, like someone who had been expecting trouble for a very long time. Ruth quietly exhaled. "That's Amos." "Who is he?" "The man who let me stay." Amos took several slow steps toward the SUV. Then he stopped. His eyes moved from Ruth to Sterling. Recognition appeared immediately, not because they had met, because he knew exactly who Sterling was. The old man removed his cap. Then he said something through the open window that made Sterling's pulse quicken all over again. "You're Malcolm's boy." Amos looked toward the container, then back at Sterling. "Thank God you finally came home. Your mother wasn't supposed to be living in that thing for this long." Amos Bell stood beside the SUV with one hand resting on the fence post. His face carried the weathered look of a man who had spent decades working outdoors. There was no pity in his expression, just concern. Sterling stepped out of the vehicle. "What do you mean she wasn't supposed to be living here this long?" Amos glanced toward Ruth before answering. "Maybe we should sit down." "No," Sterling said. "I think we've done enough sitting down." For a moment Amos looked as if he might object. Then he nodded. "Fair enough." Ruth slowly climbed out of the passenger seat. She looked embarrassed, which only made Sterling angrier. Somehow she had been pushed into a life where she felt ashamed of receiving help. Amos led them toward the container. The closer Sterling got, the worse it felt. The structure had once been blue. Rust had eaten through most of the paint. One side was patched with mismatched sheets of metal. A section of the roof had obviously been repaired after storm damage. Someone had fought hard to keep this place standing. The realization hit him immediately. His mother had fought hard. Not Lydia, not the trust, not the charity guest drinking coffee at the lake house. Ruth. Amos unlocked the door and stepped. Inside, Sterling stopped. The container was clean. Painfully clean. The floor had been swept. The shelves were organized. A folding table sat beneath a small window. A propane stove occupied one corner. Battery-powered LED strips lined the ceiling. Nothing about the space suggested laziness or neglect. Everything suggested effort, the effort of someone trying to preserve dignity with almost nothing. Sterling walked farther inside. A narrow bed sat against one wall. A bookshelf, a coffee mug, a stack of library books. His throat tightened. This wasn't temporary housing, this wasn't a guest room, this was a life. A smaller life than the one she deserved, but a life nonetheless. Ruth stood quietly near the entrance. I made it work. Sterling looked at her. The sentence hurt more than if she had cried, because she wasn't asking for sympathy. She was defending herself, as if she needed to justify surviving. "No," he said softly, "you shouldn't have had to." The container fell silent. Amos finally spoke. "When Lydia brought her here, she said it would be for a few weeks." Sterling turned. "What exactly happened?" Amos crossed his arms. "About 18 months ago, Lydia showed up with a trailer full of belongings. Said there were repairs being done at the lake house. Said Ruth needed somewhere quiet for a while." Sterling looked at his mother. She lowered her eyes. "I believed her." Amos nodded. "So did I. I let her use this place because the church wasn't using the land anymore. It was supposed to be temporary. What changed?" Amos gave a humorless laugh. "The weeks became months." Sterling already knew the answer. "And every time Ruth asked about going home?" Amos looked toward the floor. "There was always another reason: repairs, paperwork, insurance issues, contractors, excuses, one after another. A slow trap. The kind that worked because it never looked like a trap until it was too late." Sterling walked toward the shelf beside the bed. Several framed photographs sat there. Most were old family pictures, holidays, fishing trips, church dinners. His eyes stopped on one particular photograph, Malcolm and Ruth standing together near the lake. The picture looked recent, taken only a year or two before Malcolm died. Sterling picked it up. The frame was cracked. He noticed something tucked behind it, a folded piece of paper. His pulse quickened. He carefully slid it out. It was a utility bill, addressed to the lake house, only it wasn't recent. The date showed 14 months earlier. The mailing address listed beneath the account holder wasn't the lake house. It was Southern Legacy Management, the same company from the bank statements. Sterling immediately took a picture of it with his phone. Then another. Amos noticed. "You found something, maybe." Sterling folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. For the first time since arriving in Mississippi, he felt like he was collecting actual evidence instead of emotions. That mattered. Feelings could be dismissed. Documents were harder to ignore. A knock sounded against the container wall. All three looked up. A tall man appeared at the doorway, late 60s, heavy build, gray beard, work boots covered in dirt. The man froze when he saw Sterling, then he smiled. "Well, I'll be damned." Amos chuckled. "Otis Reed." Sterling recognized the name immediately, not from memory, from the cemetery. Ruth had mentioned a coworker named Otis months ago during one of their rare phone calls. Otis pointed directly at Sterling. "You look exactly like Malcolm when you're irritated. That's apparently often." Otis laughed. Then his expression softened when he looked at Ruth. "Everything all right?" "No," Sterling answered before she could. Otis nodded, figured. He stepped inside carrying a small metal toolbox. Without asking permission, he sat down in a folding chair. The familiarity told Sterling everything. Otis had been part of Ruth's survival long before today. "How long have you known my mother?" Sterling asked. "About 18 months. The same number again. Everything pointed back to the same moment, the same relocation, the same disappearance. Otis scratched his beard. "I work nights at Oak Ridge." Sterling's attention sharpened. "The cemetery, yep." Otis looked toward Ruth. "She never wanted me talking about this." Ruth sighed. "Because it wasn't anybody's business. It became his business the second he found you scrubbing marble at 6 in the morning. Ruth didn't argue, because she knew he was right. Sterling pulled a chair closer. "What haven't I been told?" Otis and Amos exchanged a glance. Not a long glance, just enough to make Sterling notice. And that bothered him, because it was the same look people exchanged when they were deciding how much truth someone was ready to hear. Finally, Otis opened the toolbox. Inside were receipts, folded papers, small notebooks, nothing unusual, until he pulled out a photocopied pay stub. He handed it to Sterling. The numbers were small, painfully small, but that wasn't what caught his attention. There was a deduction listed near the bottom. Then another, each month, same wording, maintenance debt deducted. Sterling frowned. "What maintenance debt?" Otis handed him a second pay stub. Then a third, same deduction, same wording, month after month. The amounts varied. The explanation never changed. Ruth looked uncomfortable. "Otis, no." His voice remained gentle but firm. "He needs to know." Sterling flipped through the papers. Then his eyes landed on something that made his stomach turn. At the very top of every deduction record was the same account destination, Care Arrangement Account. Manager, Lydia Vale. The container suddenly felt smaller, hotter. Sterling looked up slowly. What is this? Nobody answered immediately. The silence itself was an answer. He stared at the documents again. His mother had been earning almost nothing, and part of what little she earned had been diverted somewhere else. Through an account managed by Lydia. Not the trust, not the church, not the cemetery. Lydia. The realization hit harder than anything he'd seen so far. This wasn't neglect. Neglect was passive. This required action, paperwork, authorization, ongoing control. Sterling's phone buzzed in his pocket. A new email notification. He almost ignored it. Then he noticed the sender, Southern Legacy Management. His request for public property records had received a response. His pulse accelerated. He opened the email. Attached was a county filing document, property occupancy authorization, location, former Bell Chapel Church property, resident, Ruth Vale, authorized representative, Lydia Vale. Sterling's eyes moved lower, then lower still, until he reached the final section, the signature line. His breath caught, because beside Ruth's signature was a witness signature, and he recognized the name immediately. Not Otis, not Amos, not anyone he expected. The witness who had signed the document was Greg Hollister, the same trust administrator standing beside Lydia at the lake house. Sterling stared at Greg Hollister's name until the letters stopped looking like letters. He had seen that man less than an hour earlier standing behind Lydia in the lake house, holding a folder like he belonged there. Calm, professional, polite enough to make distrust look unreasonable. Now his signature sat on a document that had helped move Ruth into a steel container behind an abandoned church. Sterling turned the phone so Amos and Otis could see. Otis leaned closer, then swore under his breath. Amos removed his cap slowly. That's the same man who came out here with Lydia. Ruth's face went pale. Sterling looked at her. You remember him? She nodded once, barely. He said he was helping with paperwork, she whispered. He said if I signed, it would keep the county from bothering me while the house was being repaired. Did he explain that this made Lydia your authorized representative? Ruth swallowed. No. The word was small, not weak. Small because there was so much humiliation packed inside it. Sterling had spent years negotiating contracts with corporations that buried danger inside polite language. He knew how paperwork could be used like a weapon. But seeing it used against his mother made him feel sick. He forwarded the document to himself, saved it in 2 different folders, then sent a copy to his assistant in Singapore with one short note. Archive this immediately. Do not delete. Ruth watched him. What are you doing, making sure things don't disappear? Otis nodded approvingly. Good. Sterling looked around the container again. The patched wall. The solar panel wires running through a small opening near the ceiling. The neat line of canned food on the shelf. The bed folded tight enough to pass inspection. His mother had been living in evidence. Every object here told a story Lydia probably hoped no one would ever hear. How did you get this container? Sterling asked. Ruth looked uneasy, as if the question itself carried shame. I bought it cheap. With what money? She hesitated. My cemetery some cash Amos lent me. Otis helped with hauling. Sterling turned toward Otis. The older man shrugged. I knew a guy with a flatbed. Amos added, the container was supposed to be storage for donated furniture. Door was warped. Roof leaked. Nobody wanted it. Ruth said she could make it livable enough. Sterling looked at his mother. You fixed this yourself? Not all of it. That's not what I asked. Ruth's eyes moved around the little space she had fought to make habitable. I didn't have a choice. The words landed heavily. For 7 years, Sterling had believed choices were something money created. Better choices, safer choices, cleaner choices. Now he saw the truth in front of him. Some people did not choose between good and bad. They chose between bad and worse, and then learned how to call the result enough. Amos walked to the back wall and tapped a metal patch above the bed. That came loose during the spring storm. Rain blew straight in. She was sleeping with a tarp over the mattress for 3 nights before she told me. Ruth gave him a tired look. You were recovering from surgery. I had a knee replacement, Ruth. I wasn't dying. You weren't supposed to be climbing ladders. Otis snorted. Neither were you. For the first time that day, something almost like warmth moved through the container. Not happiness, not even relief, just proof that Ruth had not been entirely alone. That mattered. It did not excuse anything. But it mattered. Sterling walked to the far end of the container where a narrow rack held Ruth's clothes. 3 blouses, 2 pairs of work pants, 1 church dress sealed in a plastic garment bag. Beside them hung an old brown jacket. He recognized it immediately, his father's work coat. Malcolm had worn it on cold mornings when he repaired fences, cleaned gutters, or drove into town before sunrise. Sterling remembered it as something solid, dependable. Malcolm had always smelled faintly of sawdust, coffee, and the peppermint gum he kept in his shirt pocket. The coat looked heavier now, older. Ruth noticed where he was looking. "I kept that one." Sterling reached for it gently. "May I?" She nodded. He lifted the jacket from the hook. Dust rose faintly from the shoulders. He ran one hand over the fabric, feeling the worn elbows, the frayed cuffs, the place near the collar where Malcolm had stitched a small tear instead of throwing it away. Something hard pressed against the inner lining. Sterling paused. There was a pocket inside the coat. Not the ordinary pocket. A narrow seam had been hand-stitched shut. His heartbeat changed. "Mom." Ruth stepped closer. "What?" Sterling turned the jacket toward the light. The stitching was uneven but deliberate. Not factory work. Something someone had done by hand and meant to hide. Otis leaned in. "Well, that's new." Amos frowned. "Ruth, did you know about that?" She shook her head. "No." Sterling looked around for something sharp. Otis opened his toolbox and handed him a pocket knife without a word. Carefully, Sterling cut the thread. The seam opened. Inside was a folded envelope wrapped in plastic. His name was written across the front. Sterling. The handwriting stopped him cold. Malcolm's handwriting. Bold, slanted, familiar. For a second, he could not move. He had prepared himself for bank records, forged signatures, and legal tricks. He had not prepared himself for his father's hand reaching out from inside an old coat. Ruth covered her mouth. Amos lowered his head. Otis looked away, giving the moment privacy. Sterling turned the envelope over. There was another line beneath his name. "For Sterling, only when Ruth is safe." His throat tightened. He looked at his mother. She was staring at the envelope like it might break her heart if he opened it and break her more if he didn't. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. "No," she whispered. But Malcolm hid things only when he was afraid someone would find them. Sterling carefully opened the plastic. The envelope inside was old but dry. He slid one finger under the flap. Ruth reached for his wrist, not to stop him, to steady herself. "Wait." Sterling froze. Ruth's eyes were wet now, but her voice had changed. It was no longer frightened the way it had been at the cemetery. It carried something stronger, a decision forming under pain. "If he left that for you," she said, "then we don't open it in this place." Sterling looked at her. She took a breath, not a deep one, a brave one. "I won't let Lydia make me afraid of my own husband's words." Otis nodded once, quietly proud. Amos reached for the container door. "Then where?" Ruth looked past them through the open doorway, toward the abandoned church, toward the rusted bell tower and the empty road beyond it. Then she looked back at Sterling. "Your father trusted one person outside this family," she said. "Evelyn Cross. She was with him near the end." Sterling held the envelope carefully. "Who is Evelyn Cross?" Ruth's face tightened. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she whispered, "The woman who knows why Malcolm was trying to adopt you before he died." The container fell completely silent. Even Otis stopped fidgeting. Sterling looked from the envelope in his hand to Ruth's face, searching for some sign that he had misunderstood what she had just said. "Adopt me?" The words sounded strange coming out of his mouth. Ruth lowered herself onto the edge of the bed, not because she was weak, because she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. "I didn't want you to hear it like this." "Then how was I supposed to hear it?" She stared at the floor. "From Malcolm." The answer hit harder than he expected, because Malcolm was gone, and whatever explanation existed had been buried with him. Sterling sat down across from her. The envelope remained unopened in his hands. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Ruth rubbed her palms together, a nervous habit he had not seen in years. Malcolm started asking questions before he died. What kind of questions? The kind that made Lydia nervous. That answer only deepened the confusion. Nothing connected, not yet. The house, the trust, the cemetery, the container, the adoption records. Each piece felt real, but none fit together. Amos quietly moved toward the door. "Maybe we should give them some space." Otis nodded. Neither man looked surprised by Ruth's words. That fact did not escape Sterling. After they stepped outside, Ruth remained silent for several moments, Finally, she spoke. Do you remember the last year of Malcolm's illness? Sterling nodded. I was flying back and forth constantly. He hid more from you than you realized. That sounded exactly like Malcolm, strong enough to help everyone else, stubborn enough to suffer alone. He started reviewing old family records. Why, I don't know. The answer came too quickly. Sterling noticed, and Ruth knew he noticed. For the first time all day, he pushed back. No, Ruth looked up. No what? No more half-truths. His voice remained calm. That made it stronger. I came home and found you cleaning graves. I found out you've been living in a shipping container while somebody else runs charity events out of your house. I found paperwork with Lydia's name on everything. Now you're telling me Malcolm was trying to adopt me. He leaned forward. I'm done pretending this is normal. The words hung in the air. Ruth closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, something had shifted. Not complete honesty, but movement toward it. Malcolm found records he wasn't supposed to find. Sterling frowned. What records? I don't know exactly. You just said I know what he told me. Her voice cracked slightly. He became obsessed near the end. He kept saying certain things didn't match. What's dates? The answer felt insignificant. Yet it clearly wasn't. Dates on what? Family documents. Sterling's pulse quickened. What kind of family documents? Ruth looked away again, and that was answer enough. She knew more than she wanted to admit. Maybe not everything, but more. Before Sterling could press further, his phone rang. Unknown number, Mississippi area code. He almost ignored it, then answered. Hello? A woman's voice responded. Mr. Vale? Yes, my name is Evelyn Cross. Every muscle in his body tightened. Ruth looked up immediately. Sterling stood. How did you get this number? I've had it for years. The answer was unsettling. Who gave it to you? A pause. Then your father. The container suddenly felt smaller. Sterling stepped outside. The evening air hit his face. Behind him, he could feel Ruth listening. He gave you my number, along with instructions. The words landed heavily. What instructions? Another pause. Longer this time. To call if you ever returned to Mississippi and started asking questions. Sterling stared across the abandoned church property. The setting sun painted everything gold. For some reason that made the conversation feel even stranger. When did he tell you that? 3 weeks before he died. The answer sent a chill through him. Because Malcolm had planned for this. Not hoped, not wondered, planned. What exactly did he tell you? He told me Lydia would eventually make a mistake. Sterling's jaw tightened, and, he said when she did, the truth would start surfacing. The silence that followed was unbearable. Finally, Sterling asked the question sitting at the center of everything. What truth? Evelyn hesitated. When she spoke again, her voice sounded older, more careful. The kind that destroys families. Sterling almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. His family already looked destroyed. What does that mean? I won't discuss it over the phone. Then where? My office. I thought you retired. I did. Then why do you still have an office? Another pause. You ask good questions. Sterling's patience thinned. Evelyn, I'll answer what I can tomorrow. What if I want answers tonight? You do. Her voice softened, but answers and proof aren't the same thing. Sterling hated that she was right. Proof mattered. Especially now. Especially with Lydia involved. Before he could respond, Evelyn added something unexpected. Bring the envelope. His grip tightened around it. How do you know about the envelope? For the first time during the conversation, Evelyn sounded genuinely surprised. Because Malcolm told me where he planned to hide it. Sterling's stomach dropped. He told you? Yes. And you never came for it? No, why not? Because it wasn't mine. The answer felt honest, painfully honest. Sterling looked through the container doorway. Ruth sat motionless on the bed, waiting, listening, carrying years of secrets alone. What is in it? He asked quietly. Evelyn's response came immediately. I don't know. You expect me to believe that? I know what Malcolm hoped it contained. Hoped? Yes, the word bothered him, because hope suggested uncertainty, and uncertainty suggested danger. Evelyn, her voice became firm, do not open it tonight. Sterling frowned. Why? Because if Malcolm finished what he intended to put inside, your life changes. A cold sensation spread through his chest, and if he didn't? This time the pause felt endless. When she finally answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. Then Lydia may have been hiding the wrong secret all along. The call ended. Sterling remained standing beside the container. The phone felt heavy in one hand, the envelope heavier in the other. Behind him, the screen door creaked open. Ruth stepped outside. She studied his face. What did she say? Sterling looked at the envelope again. For Sterling, only when Ruth is safe. Then he looked back at his mother. Evelyn wants to meet tomorrow. Ruth nodded slowly, as if she had expected that. Sterling hesitated, then asked the question that had been growing inside him since the call began. When Malcolm started investigating those records, Ruth froze. Was he trying to protect me from Lydia? The color drained from her face. No, Sterling felt his pulse hammering. Then who was he trying to protect? Ruth stared at the envelope. For a moment she looked as though she might finally answer. Instead, she whispered something that made the fear return to her eyes. He was trying to protect Malcolm, and for the first time, Sterling wondered if the biggest secret in the family had nothing to do with Lydia at all. Ruth's words stayed with Sterling long after the sun disappeared. He barely slept that night. The container creaked occasionally as the temperature dropped. Wind moved through the trees around the abandoned ch. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed across the dark countryside. Sterling sat at the folding table with Malcolm's envelope in front of him, unopened. More than once he almost broke his promise and tore it open. More than once he stopped himself. Evelyn's warning bothered him. Not because she told him not to open it, because she had sounded afraid. People weren't afraid of old letters. They were afraid of what those letters could prove. Just after sunrise, Sterling drove into Meridian alone. Ruth insisted on staying behind. She claimed she wanted to give him space. The truth was obvious. She was terrified of whatever waited at the end of this road. Evelyn Cross's office occupied the second floor of a narrow brick building near the county courthouse. The sign downstairs advertised tax preparation, bookkeeping, and estate planning. Nothing dramatic, nothing mysterious. The kind of place people passed every day without noticing. Sterling climbed the stairs carrying the envelope. A woman in her mid-60s opened the office door before he knocked. Silver hair, sharp eyes, calm posture. This was not someone who frightened easily. "You look like Malcolm," she said. Sterling almost laughed. "Lately, everyone seemed eager to tell him that I've heard." Evelyn stepped aside. "Come in." The office smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Shelves lined the walls. Legal binders, medical records, family estate files, the accumulated history of hundreds of lives. Evelyn gestured toward a chair. Sterling sat. She noticed the envelope immediately, so he actually hid it there. "You knew. I knew he planned to." Sterling placed it carefully on the desk. "You still haven't told me why." Evelyn folded her hands. "Because Malcolm stopped trusting people." The answer felt painfully believable. "Who?" "Mostly Lydia. Mostly." Evelyn held his gaze, sometimes himself. That wasn't the answer Sterling expected. Before he could respond, Evelyn opened a drawer and removed a thin file folder. Its edges were worn, frequently handled, important. She placed it on the desk between them. "Before we discuss the envelope, I need you to understand something." Sterling waited. "Your father spent nearly a year trying to verify information." His pulse quickened. "What information?" "Family records." The same phrase again. The same vague answer, the same growing frustration. Evelyn noticed. "You're impatient, shouldn't I be?" Yes. Her honesty surprised him. "But impatience won't change facts." She opened the folder. Inside were photocopies, property records, trust documents, medical authorizations, nothing explosive, at first. Then she slid one page toward him. Sterling frowned. It was a timeline, handwritten, created by Malcolm, names, dates, notes, corrections, questions marked in red ink. Several entries had been circled repeatedly. One name appeared more than any other. Lydia. What am I looking at? A man trying to figure out why certain records didn't match. Sterling studied the pages. Malcolm had been meticulous, every discrepancy noted, every missing document listed, every unexplained change highlighted. It looked less like estate planning and more like an investigation. What exactly was he investigating? Evelyn exhaled slowly. At first, property transfers. At first. Later it became something else. There it was again. The sense that every answer opened another door. Sterling leaned forward. "What changed?" Evelyn hesitated. Then she stood and crossed the room. From another cabinet she retrieved a smaller folder. Unlike the first one, this file contained only a few pages. She returned to her desk, set it down, then left her hand resting on top of it. Protective, almost reluctant. Malcolm found references to legal documents that shouldn't have existed. Sterling's eyes narrowed. What kind of legal documents? Evelyn looked directly at him. Adoption-related filings. The room seemed quieter. Sterling said nothing. He simply waited. Because for the first time Evelyn appeared ready to stop speaking in circles. Your father contacted me because I had experience dealing with family record disputes. She paused. He wanted help locating original filings. Mine? Possibly. The word irritated him. Possibly? Evelyn nodded. Nothing was clear. She tapped the second folder. There were references to amendments. Amendments to what? Adult kinship adoption paperwork. Sterling stared at her. Every answer created more confusion. Not less. He was 42 years old. Why would anyone be discussing adult adoption paperwork? Why would Malcolm investigate it? Why would Lydia care? None of it fit. Evelyn seemed to read the question on his face. You're assuming this started with you. Sterling frowned. What does that mean? For the first time, Evelyn looked genuinely uncomfortable. Not frightened, burdened, like someone carrying information they wished belonged to someone else. It means Malcolm eventually stopped asking whether documents were missing. Sterling's pulse accelerated. What was he asking instead? Evelyn looked down at the file, then back at him. He started asking who removed them. The distinction hit hard. Missing documents suggested mistakes. Removed documents suggested intent. Someone acting, someone hiding, someone protecting something, or someone protecting themselves. Sterling looked at the envelope again. His father's handwriting stared back at him. For Sterling, only when Ruth is safe. A message from a dead man, a warning, maybe both. Evelyn followed his gaze. You should open it now. Sterling blinked. The sudden change surprised him. Yesterday you told me not to. Yesterday you were standing in a shipping container surrounded by fear and confusion. She nodded toward the envelope. Today you're ready. Sterling wasn't sure he believed that. But he opened it anyway, carefully. The paper inside crackled softly. There was a letter, several pages, and something else. A folded document. Sterling removed the document first. His stomach tightened immediately. It was a legal filing, incomplete, unsigned by one party, stamped but never finalized. At the top appeared words he had never expected to see attached to his own life. Petition for adult adoption amendment. His name appeared on the first page. Malcolm's appeared on the second. Sterling felt his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then he noticed something stranger, much stranger. The amendment referenced another filing, an earlier filing, a filing with a case number, a filing created years before Malcolm ever began the adoption process. His eyes moved to the line beneath it, the original petitioner's name. He stopped breathing, not because he recognized the name, because he didn't. The petitioner wasn't Malcolm, it wasn't Ruth, and it definitely wasn't Lydia. It was someone neither of them had ever mentioned, a man named Daniel Mercer. Evelyn saw the color leave Sterling's face. What is it? Slowly he turned the page toward her. The moment Evelyn read the name, her expression changed. Not surprise, recognition, the worst kind. The kind that meant she had been hoping Sterling wouldn't find this part yet. And for the first time since walking into the office, Sterling realized Evelyn already knew exactly who Daniel Mercer was. Evelyn's expression answered the question before she spoke. She knew the name, she had known it for a long time. Sterling slowly lowered the document onto the desk. Who is Daniel Mercer? Evelyn leaned back in her chair. For several seconds, she studied Malcolm's handwriting on the papers scattered between them. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured. He's not someone Lydia expected Malcolm to find. That's not an answer. No, it's context. Sterling felt frustration building again. Every person connected to this story seemed to possess pieces of the truth while refusing to hand over the whole thing. Evelyn noticed. You want certainty. I want honesty. The correction made her nod. Fair enough. She removed her glasses and folded them carefully. Daniel Mercer lived in Jackson for many years. Before that, he worked throughout Mississippi handling estate disputes and guardianship matters. Sterling frowned. A lawyer? No. Then what? A court-appointed investigator. That surprised him, not because of the title, because it immediately raised a different question. Why would a court investigator appear in paperwork connected to his family? Evelyn slid another document toward him. The paper was old, a photocopy of a county filing request. Daniel Mercer's name appeared near the bottom. What exactly was he investigating? Evelyn hesitated. The records don't say. But Malcolm cared enough to keep this. Yes. Sterling studied the page. The filing referenced sealed records, nothing more, no explanation, no conclusions, just requests, petitions, references, paper trails disappearing into locked archives, the kind of records ordinary people never saw. His father's notes filled the margins. Find original filing, missing attachment, ask Evelyn, check witness list. The words felt less like instructions and more like breadcrumbs. Malcolm had known he might not finish. Sterling felt that realization settle heavily in his chest. His father had been preparing someone else to continue. Someone else was him. Evelyn pointed toward the adoption amendment. Look at the date. Sterling did. The filing referenced by Daniel Mercer had been created nearly 15 years earlier. Long before Malcolm became seriously ill, long before Lydia controlled the trust, long before most of the conflict he understood today. Why would Malcolm care about a filing that old? Evelyn looked away, because she already knew where this question led. Sterling saw it, and for the first time he understood something important. Evelyn wasn't protecting Lydia. She was protecting Ruth, maybe Malcolm too. The realization changed his approach. He softened his voice. What was Malcolm afraid of? The question landed differently. Evelyn's shoulders dropped slightly. He wasn't afraid of learning the truth. She paused. He was afraid of what it would do to Ruth. That answer felt real, not strategic, not evasive, real. Sterling leaned back. For the first time since arriving in Mississippi, he considered the possibility that the mystery was older than Lydia, older than the trust, older than the house. Maybe Lydia had exploited something. Maybe she hadn't created it. Evelyn stood and walked toward the window. Outside, traffic moved slowly past the courthouse square, normal life. People buying coffee, running errands, arguing over parking spots, completely unaware that decades of secrets were unfolding above them. When Malcolm found Daniel Mercer's name, Evelyn said quietly, he initially thought it was related to property. Sterling waited. He was wrong. The room felt smaller. What was it related to? Evelyn looked back at him. Identity. The word lingered, dangerous, heavy. Identity could mean many things. Family, inheritance, legal status, blood, name, history. Sterling stared at the documents again. Suddenly the adoption amendment looked different, less like a paperwork issue, more like a symptom, a response to something older, something hidden. He looked up. Did Malcolm ever find Daniel Mercer? Evelyn nodded. Yes. Sterling sat forward immediately. What happened? Her expression tightened. Daniel refused to discuss certain details. Why? Professional obligations. Sterling almost laughed. A dead end. Another one. But Evelyn wasn't finished. He did say one thing. A what? Evelyn returned to her desk, slowly, carefully, as if she understood exactly how much weight the next sentence carried. He told Malcolm that someone inside the Vale family had spent years making sure certain records remained difficult to access. Sterling's stomach dropped, not destroyed, not erased, hidden, intentionally. For years the distinction mattered. Someone had been maintaining the secrecy, managing it, protecting it. That required effort, planning, knowledge. Evelyn watched him absorb the information. Malcolm immediately suspected Lydia. Was he right? I don't know. It sounded honest. That almost made it worse, because uncertainty left room for possibilities. Too many possibilities. Sterling rubbed his forehead. How much of this does Ruth know? Evelyn didn't answer immediately. That alone was an answer. Not much, or perhaps not enough. Before Sterling could push further, his phone buzzed. Text message. From Otis. Need to talk. Not over phone. Sterling frowned. A second message appeared. Someone came looking for Ruth. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Sterling immediately called. Otis answered on the first ring. Where are you? Evelyn's office. Stay there for a minute. Sterling stood. What happened? Otis sounded angry. Not scared. Angry black SUV showed up at the church. Sterling's jaw tightened. Who? Didn't recognize the driver? What did they want? They asked questions. Questions. Not good. People who already knew the answers didn't ask questions. People looking for weaknesses did. Sterling glanced toward Evelyn. She was listening now carefully. What kind of questions? Otis lowered his voice. They wanted to know if Ruth still had Malcolm's coat. Every muscle in Sterling's body went rigid. The coat, not Ruth, not the container. The coat, the hidden envelope. The timing couldn't be coincidence. Someone knew. Did they say why? No. Did they identify themselves? No. Sterling closed his eyes briefly. The situation had changed. Until now they had been uncovering old secrets. Now someone else was moving too. Someone else was searching. Otis continued. After they left, Amos remembered something. Sterling immediately focused. What? The day Lydia brought Ruth to the church. A pause. Then Greg Hollister wasn't the only man with her. Sterling's pulse quickened. What are you saying? Amos remembered another visitor. The silence stretched. He signed the guest log. Sterling gripped the phone tighter. Who? Otis exhaled slowly. Daniel Mercer. The name hit like a hammer. Sterling turned slowly toward Evelyn. She had heard it too, and the look on her face told him something had just gone very, very wrong. Because this wasn't a dead investigator buried in old records. Daniel Mercer had been standing beside Lydia 18 months ago, and nobody had ever told Malcolm. Evelyn stood so abruptly that her chair rolled backward into a filing cabinet. For the first time since Sterling had met her, she looked rattled, not confused, not surprised. Afraid. That's impossible, she said. Sterling stared at her. You know him. It wasn't a question anymore. Evelyn pressed both hands against the edge of her desk. I knew of him. The distinction sounded weak even to her. Sterling could hear it. The silence that followed stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Finally, Evelyn walked to the door and locked it. The click echoed through the office. Sterling's stomach tightened. What aren't you telling me? Evelyn turned around. A lot. At least she was honest. She returned to her desk and sat down slowly. Daniel Mercer retired almost 8 years ago. Retired doesn't mean dead. No. Then why did you act like he belonged to ancient history? Evelyn rubbed her temple. Because after Malcolm spoke with him, Daniel disappeared. Sterling frowned. Disappeared? He sold his house. People move. He closed his office. People retire. He cut contact with almost everyone he worked with. That landed differently. Evelyn opened a drawer and removed a notebook. The pages were filled with dates and names. Her own investigation. Or perhaps Malcolm's. Maybe both. Malcolm didn't trust what Daniel told him. Sterling leaned forward. What did he tell him? Evelyn looked down at the notebook. Almost nothing. That answer somehow felt worse. Because silence was harder to fight than lies. You said Malcolm met him. He did. What happened? Evelyn hesitated, then finally committed. Daniel claimed the records Malcolm was looking for had been sealed decades earlier. Sterling waited. He also claimed nobody inside the family could access them. And Malcolm believed him? No. The answer came immediately. He thought Daniel was protecting someone. Sterling felt a chill. Who? That was the problem. Evelyn closed the notebook. He couldn't figure it out. Outside the courthouse window, traffic continued moving. Life continued. Meanwhile, another piece of the story had shifted. Daniel Mercer wasn't some forgotten name buried in paperwork. He was connected to Lydia. Connected recently. Connected physically. Standing beside her at the church 18 months ago, Sterling pulled out his phone and called Otis back. The older man answered immediately. Tell me exactly what Amos remembered. I already told you. Tell me again. Otis sighed. He remembered Daniel because the man signed the visitor log. Did Amos talk to him? A little. Sterling stood and began pacing. What did they discuss? Mostly the container. The room froze. Sterling stopped walking. The container? Yeah, Otis sounded uneasy now. He asked questions about where it came from, how long Ruth had been there, whether anybody visited regularly. Sterling exchanged a look with Evelyn. Neither liked where this was going. Why would he care? That's what Amos wondered. Otis paused. Then Amos remembered something else. Sterling's pulse accelerated. What? There was a camera. A cold sensation spread through him. What camera? The guy had one around his neck. Sterling frowned. A camera. Professional looking. Now even Evelyn looked confused. Daniel Mercer, a retired investigator, showing up with Lydia, taking pictures of Ruth's container. None of it fit. Not yet. After ending the call, Sterling relayed everything. Evelyn listened carefully. When he finished, she stood again and crossed the room. This time she unlocked a tall metal cabinet. Inside were dozens of boxes, old files, archived cases, personal records, history preserved in cardboard. She searched for nearly 2 minutes before pulling out a thin folder. Her expression darkened immediately. What? Without answering, she handed it over. Sterling opened it. Inside was a photocopy of a grant proposal. The logo at the top belonged to a rural housing foundation. The document was years old, rejected, unfunded, but one section caught his attention. Project Concept, Transitional Micro-Shelter Demonstration Unit. He frowned. The proposal included photographs, Rusted structures, temporary housing concepts, converted storage units, and one image looked disturbingly familiar. Not identical, but familiar. A steel container converted into emergency housing. Sterling looked up. "What is this?" Evelyn folded her arms. "A proposal Daniel Mercer consulted on years ago." The implications arrived slowly, then all at once. His eyes widened. "You're saying Daniel already knew about container housing? Long before Ruth moved into one." The room became very quiet. Sterling looked at the photograph again. Not Ruth's container, but close. Too close. The same style, the same concept, the same idea. A knot formed in his stomach. Then why was he taking pictures of hers? Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Because she didn't know, or didn't want to guess. Both possibilities were bad. Sterling sat back down, his thoughts raced. Daniel Mercer, the adoption records, the sealed filings, the church, the container, Lydia. Everything kept circling back. Different roads, same destination. This phone vibrated. Otis. It was Ruth. He answered immediately. "Mom?" Her voice sounded strained, not frightened, shaken. "Where are you?" "With Evelyn." A pause, then, "Can you come back?" Sterling straightened. "What happened?" Ruth hesitated. He could hear Amos speaking faintly in the background. Then Otis. Both sounded tense. "Mom." When she finally spoke, her voice barely held together. "Someone broke into the container." The words hit hard. Sterling stood instantly. "What?" "They didn't take much." That wasn't reassuring. Not even slightly. "What did they take?" Silence, then the coat. Sterling closed his eyes. Of course. Not money, not tools, not food. Malcolm's coat. The coat that had hidden the envelope. The coat someone had been searching for. His pulse thundered. "Are you okay?" "Yes." But she didn't sound okay. Not really. Sterling grabbed his keys. "I'm coming." The drive back felt endless. Every possibility ran through his mind. Someone knew about the envelope. Someone believed there was more hidden inside the coat. Or perhaps they thought there was another letter, another document, another secret. When he finally reached the church property, Otis met him outside. The older man's face was grim. Amos stood nearby holding a flashlight despite the daylight. Ruth sat on the container steps, very still. Sterling rushed toward her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "No. Tell me what happened." Before she could answer, Amos handed Sterling a small object, a photograph. Old, worn, recently discovered. "We found this under the bed after they left." Sterling looked down. The image showed 3 adults standing together beside a courthouse. One was clearly Malcolm. The second was Ruth. The third man stared directly into the camera. Daniel Mercer. Sterling's eyes narrowed. Then he noticed something else, something that made his blood run cold. Written across the back of the photograph in Malcolm's handwriting were 6 words. "If anything happens, find Daniel first." 3 months after the break-in, the first hearing took place at the county courthouse. The photograph, the hidden documents, the trust records, the payroll deductions, and Malcolm's files did not create an instant victory. Real life rarely worked that way. But together they created something harder to ignore. A pattern. The civil investigation that followed uncovered years of financial irregularities tied to the Vale Family Heritage Trust. Auditors found grant money routed through consulting agreements. Housing funds intended for community projects had supported expenses connected to Lydia's organization. The records did not prove every accusation Sterling suspected, but they proved enough. Enough for Lydia to lose control. Enough for the board of her charity to remove her. Enough for state auditors to begin asking questions she could no longer avoid. Greg Hollister resigned before the review finished. Several trust transactions were frozen, and for the first time in years, Ruth's name reappeared on documents that affected her own life. The biggest surprise came from Malcolm, not because of a shocking secret, because of how carefully he had tried to protect the people he loved. The key Ruth remembered was eventually found inside an old box among Malcolm's volunteer records at the cemetery office. It opened a small safe tucked behind a filing cabinet in a storage room few people even knew existed. Inside were copies, a revised will, letters, financial notes, and a detailed list of withdrawals Malcolm had questioned during the final year of his life. The documents did not erase every legal dispute. They did not magically return every dollar. But they established intent. Malcolm had known something was wrong. He had been gathering proof, and he had been running out of time. The final letter addressed to Ruth was simple. He apologized for not acting sooner. He admitted he had trusted family loyalty longer than he should have, and he asked her not to spend the rest of her life fighting ghosts. The letter to Sterling stayed with him even longer. It contained no dramatic revelation about bloodlines, no DNA surprise, no last-minute twist. Instead, Malcolm wrote about choice, about showing up, about staying, about the difference between biology and responsibility. The truth Daniel Mercer had guarded for years eventually surfaced through verified records and testimony. Malcolm had learned that older family filings could be manipulated to challenge Sterling's future inheritance rights. Lydia had discovered the same vulnerability and quietly used it as leverage after Malcolm's death. That was why Malcolm had pursued the adult adoption amendment. Not because he doubted Sterling, because he wanted to protect him. The paperwork had never been fully completed before Malcolm died. Yet every witness, every letter, every action pointed in the same direction. Malcolm had chosen Sterling as his son long before any document existed. That mattered more than Sterling expected. By the end of summer, Ruth faced a decision. The lake house had been restored to her control. Everyone assumed she would move back immediately. She didn't. The house carried too many memories. Some beautiful, some painful. Instead, she made a different choice. Part of the property was sold legally through the estate process. The proceeds gave her something she had not possessed in years. Options. The old church land where the container had stood became part of a small community land trust supported by local donors and volunteers. Amos helped organize it. Otis practically lived on the site. And Sterling delayed his return to Singapore again and again. For months he worked beside them, not as a wealthy businessman, just as a son. They removed the rusted container only after Ruth was ready. The steel box that had once been a symbol of abandonment became something else, proof that she had survived. A section of its wall was preserved and mounted near the garden. Not as decoration, as history. The new house wasn't large. It didn't need to be. A modest legal tiny home stood where the container had once sat. It had proper insulation, permits, running utilities, a real foundation, and Ruth's name on every document. Nothing luxurious. Everything secure. The first evening inside arrived quietly. No ceremony, no speeches, no reporters. Just people who had earned the moment. Otis carried in a folding chair he insisted was luckier than any new furniture. Amos complained about a crooked shelf he had personally installed. Ruth laughed more that night than Sterling had heard in years. After sunset, the room grew dim. Everyone became silent. Ruth stood near the wall. Her hand rested on the light switch. For a second, she simply looked around. At the address paperwork on the counter, at the front door that locked, at the windows nobody could take away, at the life she finally controlled again. Then she flipped the switch. Warm LED light filled the room, not from a damaged solar setup, not from extension cords, not from a temporary solution, from her home, a real one. Ruth smiled, a small smile, but a genuine one. Later, after Amos and Otis left, she carried Malcolm's old coat into the living room. The replacement coat they had recovered from storage after the investigation. She folded it carefully and placed it on a chair beside the window facing the cemetery road. Not a shrine, just a place of honor. Sterling sat nearby holding Malcolm's final letter. He read the last lines again. The same lines he had already memorized. I did not give you my blood. I gave you my name every day I stayed. For a long time neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Some wounds remained. Lydia faced lawsuits, audits, and consequences that would continue long after the story ended. Ruth never pretended otherwise. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would not arrive quickly, and it would never erase responsibility. But anger no longer controlled every room. That was enough. A week later, Ruth visited Malcolm's grave. She carried flowers, nothing else, no bucket, no brush, no work gloves. She stood quietly beside the stone for several minutes. Then she placed the flowers down and smiled toward the sunrise. When she finally walked away, she looked lighter. Not because the past had disappeared, because it no longer owned her future. And Sterling understood something his father had known all along. Dignity was not something people gave you. It was something worth protecting, especially when the world tried to take it away. If Ruth's story reminds you that dignity can survive even the cruelest betrayal, stay with Family Echoes for the next story.